Sometimes the cruelest moments reveal the truest character of a person. What started as an ordinary evening at an upscale charity auction would become a night that exposed the ugly truth about privilege, power, and the dangerous assumption that money makes you untouchable. But what the aggressor didn't know would change everything. If you've ever witnessed someone abuse their position to hurt others, this story will show you that karma has a way of finding its mark. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Margaret Chen had worked as a server at the Grandview Hotel for 8 years. At 52, she moved through the elegant ballroom with practiced grace, balancing trays of champagne, flutes, and hors d'oeuvre with the efficiency that comes from years of experience. Her graying hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her black uniform was pressed to perfection. Tonight was the annual Children's Healthcare Foundation Gala, one of the most prestigious charity events in the city. The ballroom sparkled under crystal chandeliers, filled with the city's elite dressed in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. Margaret had served at dozens of these events over the years, watching from the sidelines as wealthy donors bid thousands of dollars on auction items while she ensured their glasses never went empty. She took pride in her work, treating each guest with quiet professionalism, regardless of how they treated her in return. Margaret lived alone in a modest apartment across town. Her husband David had passed away 5 years earlier from cancer, leaving her to manage on her servers' wages and tips. Their only child, a son named James, had moved to California after college and rarely called. Margaret filled her days with work and her evenings with books from the library, finding contentment in small pleasures and the satisfaction of a job well done. She had learned long ago not to take the behavior of wealthy guests personally. Some were kind and respectful, others barely acknowledged her existence, and a few treated service staff as if they were invisible furniture. Margaret had developed a thick skin and a professional smile that could weather almost any storm. Tonight felt different from the moment she clocked in. The event coordinator seemed more stressed than usual. The kitchen staff was behind schedule, and several VIP guests had made last-minute changes to their seating arrangements. Margaret sensed the tension in the air but focused on her responsibilities, weaving between tables to ensure every guest had what they needed. The auction had just begun when Margaret first noticed her. Victoria Ashworth sat at table 7, a woman in her early 30s with platinum blonde hair styled in an elaborate updo. Her emerald green gown probably cost more than Margaret made in 6 months, and the diamond necklace around her throat caught the light with every movement. Victoria came from old money, the kind of family whose name appeared on hospital wings and university buildings throughout the city. Margaret had served Victoria at previous events and knew her reputation among the hotel staff. She was demanding, condescending, and had a talent for making servers feel worthless with just a look. Victoria seemed to take pleasure in finding fault with everything, from the temperature of her soup to the arrangement of flowers on her table. As Margaret approached table 7 with a tray of fresh champagne, she could hear Victoria's voice rising above the polite auction chatter. She was complaining loudly to her table mates about the service, the food, and what she called the declining standards of the hotel. Her voice carried that particular tone of entitled outrage that Margaret had heard countless times before. Margaret set down fresh champagne flutes with practiced efficiency, replacing the empty ones without interrupting the conversation. She had learned to move like a ghost at these events, present when needed but invisible otherwise. As she reached for Victoria's empty glass, the woman suddenly turned and grabbed Margaret's wrist. The grip was surprisingly strong, Victoria's manicured nails digging into Margaret's skin. Margaret looked up, startled by the sudden contact, and found herself staring into eyes filled with barely contained rage. "Excuse me," Victoria said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Are you incapable of seeing that my water glass has been empty for 10 minutes? Margaret glanced at the table and saw that Victoria's water glass was indeed empty, though she had filled it less than 5 minutes earlier. "I apologize, ma'am. Let me get that for you right away." "Don't apologize," Victoria snapped, still gripping Margaret's wrist. "Just do your job properly. Is that really too much to ask?" The conversation at table 7 had stopped, other guests watching the interaction with varying degrees of discomfort. Margaret felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment but maintained her professional composure. "Of course, ma'am. I'll be right back with fresh water." Victoria released her wrist with a dismissive gesture, turning back to her companions as if Margaret had ceased to exist. Margaret hurried to the service station, her wrist throbbing where Victoria's nails had pressed into her skin. She took a deep breath, filled a fresh water glass with ice and lemon, and returned to table 7. As she leaned over to place the water glass beside Victoria's plate, disaster struck. Margaret's foot caught on the leg of an adjacent chair, causing her to stumble slightly. The water glass tilted, and a few drops of cold water splashed onto Victoria's bare shoulder. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Victoria shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. The sound cut through the auction proceedings, causing heads to turn throughout the ballroom. "You clumsy fool!" Victoria shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceiling. "Look what you've done! This dress is worth more than you make in a year." Margaret stared at the tiny wet spot on Victoria's shoulder, barely visible against the emerald fabric. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. Please, let me help you dry that." "Help me?" Victoria's voice rose to a pitch that caused several nearby conversations to stop entirely. "You've already done enough damage. Do you have any idea what this dress cost? Do you understand that it's ruined?" Margaret could see that the dress was far from ruined. The few drops of water would dry without leaving any trace, but Victoria was beyond reason. Her face had turned an alarming shade of red, and her hands were shaking with rage. "Ma'am, please," Margaret said quietly, hoping to calm the situation. "If there's any damage, I'm sure the hotel will take care of it. Let me get you a towel." "A towel?" Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You think a towel is going to fix this? You've humiliated me in front of everyone here. You've ruined my evening, my dress, everything." The auction had stopped completely now. The auctioneer stood frozen at his podium, while hundreds of guests turned to stare at the commotion. Margaret felt the weight of all those eyes on her, judging her, watching her humiliation unfold in real time. "I truly apologize," Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was an accident. Please, tell me how I can make this right." Victoria stepped closer, invading Margaret's personal space. "Make it right? You want to make it right? You're nothing but a pathetic old woman who can't even carry a glass of water without spilling it. You're incompetent, worthless, and frankly, an embarrassment to this establishment." Each word hit Margaret like a physical blow. She had endured difficult customers before, but never such a vicious, personal attack. She could feel tears threatening to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She would not give Victoria the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I understand you're upset," Margaret managed to say. "Please, let me get my supervisor. Perhaps we can find a solution." "Your supervisor?" Victoria's voice dripped with disdain. "What's your supervisor going to do? Fire you? That would be doing this hotel a favor. You clearly don't belong here. Look at yourself. Look at this room. Do you really think you fit in with people like us?" Margaret glanced around the ballroom at the sea of faces watching the spectacle. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed fascinated by the drama, and a few appeared to be enjoying Victoria's cruel performance. No one spoke up to defend her or to ask Victoria to stop her verbal assault. Victoria wasn't finished. She began to pace in a small circle around Margaret, like a predator circling its prey. "You know what your problem is? You don't know your place. You think you can move through this room like you belong here, like you're equal to the people you're serving. But you're not. You're just the help. You're invisible. You're nothing." The words cut deep because they echoed Margaret's own fears and insecurities. After David's death, she had often felt invisible, forgotten, like she was just going through the motions of living without really being alive. Victoria's cruel assessment felt like a confirmation of her worst thoughts about herself. "Please," Margaret whispered, her voice cracking despite her efforts to remain strong. "I'm trying to do my job. I'm trying to help." "Help?" Victoria spun to face her, eyes blazing with malicious satisfaction. "You want to help? Then disappear. Get out of my sight." Find another job where your incompetence won't ruin other people's evenings. Margaret stood frozen, overwhelmed by the public humiliation and verbal abuse. She could hear whispers from nearby tables, people commenting on the scene, some expressing sympathy but none willing to intervene. The auction remained suspended, hundreds of wealthy donors watching a powerful woman destroy a working-class server for sport. That's when Victoria reached for her wine glass. The glass was full of deep red Bordeaux, an expensive vintage that the hotel had selected specially for the gala. Victoria's hand closed around the stem, and Margaret saw what was about to happen a split second before it occurred. "Maybe this will teach you to be more careful," Victoria said with cold satisfaction. She threw the wine with practiced precision, the dark liquid arcing through the air in a perfect crimson stream. The wine hit Margaret squarely in the chest, soaking through her white shirt and black vest, staining the fabric permanently. Droplets splashed onto her face and hair, the alcohol's sharp scent filling her nostrils. The ballroom erupted in gasps and shocked murmurs. Even the most jaded socialites seemed stunned by Victoria's escalation from verbal abuse to physical humiliation. Margaret stood motionless, wine dripping from her clothing onto the marble floor, creating a spreading pool of red at her feet. But Victoria wasn't done. As Margaret stood there, shocked and humiliated, Victoria drew back her hand and slapped her hard across the face. The sound cracked through the ballroom like a whip, followed by complete, stunned silence. Margaret's cheek burned from the impact, her head ringing from the force of the blow. She raised her hand to her face, feeling the heat radiating from where Victoria's palm had connected. The wine continued to drip from her clothes, each drop echoing in the terrible silence that had fallen over the ballroom. "That's what happens when you forget your place," Victoria announced loudly, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "Maybe now you'll think twice before ruining someone else's evening with your clumsiness." Margaret stood there, wine-stained and humiliated, surrounded by hundreds of witnesses to her degradation. She could feel every eye in the room on her, some filled with pity, others with curiosity, and a few with the same cruel satisfaction that Victoria displayed. No one moved to help her. No one spoke in her defense. She was completely, utterly alone in her humiliation. The auctioneer cleared his throat nervously, unsure whether to resume the proceedings or wait for the situation to resolve itself. Hotel security had been alerted, but they remained at the edges of the ballroom, uncertain about how to handle an incident involving one of the city's most prominent families. Margaret felt something inside her break. 8 years of professional service, of quiet dignity, of treating every guest with respect regardless of how they treated her. It all felt meaningless in this moment. Victoria had reduced her to nothing more than entertainment for a room full of wealthy strangers, a cautionary tale about knowing one's place in the social hierarchy. The wine stain spread across her uniform, a permanent reminder of this moment of complete powerlessness. Margaret had weathered many storms in her 52 years. Her husband's illness and death, financial struggles, loneliness, and the countless small humiliations that came with working in service. But this felt different. This felt like the final straw, the moment when life's accumulated cruelties finally overwhelmed her ability to endure them with grace. Victoria stood over her, radiating satisfaction at having put the uppity server in her place. She smoothed her emerald gown, checked her reflection in a nearby mirror, and prepared to return to her seat as if nothing significant had happened. In her mind, she had simply corrected a social imbalance, reminded everyone present of the natural order of things. Margaret remained frozen, wine-soaked and cheek-burning, surrounded by the silence of hundreds of people who had witnessed her complete humiliation. She had never felt smaller, more invisible, or more utterly defeated than she did in that moment. Standing in a puddle of expensive wine while Victoria Ashworth prepared to return to her dinner as if Margaret's dignity meant nothing at all. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Margaret remained motionless, wine dripping from her uniform, her cheek still burning from Victoria's slap. The hundreds of guests seemed frozen in tableau, uncertain how to react to what they had just witnessed. Then the ballroom doors burst open with such force that they slammed against the walls. A man in an impeccably tailored navy suit strode into the room with the kind of presence that commanded immediate attention. He was tall, perhaps 40 years old, with graying temples and eyes that swept the ballroom with laser focus, until they found Margaret standing in her pool of spilled wine. Every conversation died instantly. Even Victoria turned to see who had made such a dramatic entrance. The man's face was a mask of controlled fury as he took in the scene before him. Margaret's stained uniform, her reddened cheek, the wine glass still in Victoria's hand, and the crowd of witnesses watching in rapt silence. What exactly is happening here? His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Each word was clipped and precise, vibrating with barely restrained anger. Victoria lifted her chin defiantly. This server was incredibly clumsy and disrespectful. I was simply teaching her some manners about proper service. The man's gaze moved from Victoria to Margaret, and his expression softened immediately. Mom, are you hurt? The single word dropped into the silence, like a stone into still water. Mom. The entire ballroom seemed to inhale collectively as the implications hit them. Margaret Chen, the humble hotel server they had just watched being humiliated, was this man's mother. Victoria's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, then dawning horror as recognition set in. This wasn't just any man. This was James Chen, founder and CEO of Titan Technologies, one of the youngest billionaires in the country. His company had revolutionized cloud computing and artificial intelligence, making him one of the most powerful men in the tech industry. James, Margaret whispered, her voice barely audible. What are you doing here? He moved quickly to her side, his expensive shoes splashing through the wine without a thought for the cost. I flew in this morning to surprise you. I wanted to make up for missing your birthday last month. His voice was gentle when he spoke to his mother, but his eyes never left Victoria's face. The crowd watched in stunned fascination as one of the country's most successful entrepreneurs carefully examined his mother's wine-stained clothing and the red mark on her cheek. James reached into his jacket and pulled out a pristine white handkerchief, gently dabbing at the wine droplets on Margaret's face. Who did this to you? He asked quietly, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Margaret glanced at Victoria, who had gone pale beneath her expertly applied makeup. It was just an accident, James. Please, let's not make a scene. An accident? James's voice rose slightly. Someone threw wine at you and slapped you by accident? Victoria finally found her voice, though it came out higher than usual. You don't understand. She spilled water on my dress. I was simply responding to her incompetence. James turned his full attention to Victoria for the first time. You're Victoria Ashworth, aren't you? Ashworth Industries. She nodded, clearly hoping that her family name might offer some protection. Yes, I am. And I think there's been a misunderstanding here. Oh, there's been a misunderstanding, all right, James said, his voice deadly calm. You misunderstood who you were dealing with. You see, this woman you just assaulted, she's not just any server, she's Margaret Chen. She's my mother. And she's the reason I'm the man I am today. The ballroom was so quiet that the sound of someone's phone buzzing seemed deafeningly loud. Victoria opened and closed her mouth several times, but no words came out. James continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. My mother worked 3 jobs to put me through school. She sacrificed everything so I could have opportunities she never had. She taught me that success isn't measured by how much money you have, but by how you treat people who can't do anything for you in return. He gestured to the crowd of wealthy donors around them. Every person in this room tonight is here because they claim to care about charity, about helping those in need. But you just watched a working woman be humiliated and abused, and not one of you said a word to stop it. Several guests looked away, clearly uncomfortable with his assessment. A few murmured apologies, but most remained silent. My mother has been working at this hotel for 8 years, James continued. She's probably served many of you at events like this. She's always spoken about how respectful and kind the guests are here. But I guess she was being generous in her assessment. Victoria finally found her voice again. I had no idea she was your mother. If I had known... If you had known, you would have treated her differently? James interrupted. So you only treat people with respect if they have powerful connections? That says everything I need to know about your character. The hotel manager appeared at James's elbow, having pushed through the crowd with several security guards in tow. Mr. Chen, I'm so sorry about this incident. We'll handle this immediately. You'll handle it? James's voice took on a dangerous edge. You let this happen on your watch. You allowed one of your employees to be physically assaulted while serving your guests, and your security team stood by and watched. The manager's face went ashen. Sir, we were unsure how to proceed given the circumstances. The circumstances? James laughed, but there was no humor in it. A woman was attacked in your ballroom in front of hundreds of witnesses. What exactly was unclear about that situation? James pulled out his phone and made a call while the entire ballroom listened. This is James Chen. I need you to cancel our contract with the Grandview Hotel immediately. All events, all reservations, everything. Yes, I know it's worth $12 million annually. Cancel it anyway. The hotel manager's face went from pale to gray. Mr. Chen, please, let's discuss this privately. I'm sure we can reach an understanding. Oh, we understand each other perfectly, James replied. You understand that money talks, and I understand that you only care about your VIP guests. Well, consider this your education and what happens when you fail to protect the people who work for you. He turned back to Victoria, who was now visibly shaking. As for you, Ms. Ashworth, you have 60 seconds to apologize to my mother. Not because she's my mother, but because she's a human being who deserves respect. Victoria looked around the ballroom desperately, as if hoping someone would come to her rescue. But the guests who had been her companions minutes earlier were now studying their phones or finding sudden interest in the flower arrangements. No one wanted to be associated with the woman who had just assaulted a billionaire's mother. I apologize, Victoria stammered. I didn't know. I mean, I'm sorry for my behavior. James shook his head. That's not an apology, that's damage control. A real apology acknowledges what you did wrong and takes responsibility for it. Victoria's carefully constructed composure finally cracked completely. I'm sorry, Mrs. Chen. I was wrong to throw wine at you, and I was wrong to hit you. There's no excuse for what I did. Margaret looked at her son, then back at Victoria. Despite everything that had happened, her voice was gentle when she spoke. I accept your apology, but I hope you'll remember this moment the next time you're tempted to take your frustrations out on someone who can't fight back. James wasn't satisfied with just an apology. He pulled out his phone again and began typing rapidly. I'm posting about tonight's events on my social media accounts. All 50 million followers will know exactly what kind of person Victoria Ashworth really is. No, please, Victoria begged. That will ruin me. My family, my reputation, everything. You should have thought about that before you decided to assault my mother, James replied coldly. Actions have consequences, Ms. Ashworth. You're about to learn that lesson very publicly. The security guards finally approached Victoria. Ma'am, we need to ask you to leave the premises. As Victoria was escorted out, she turned back one final time. Please, Mr. Chen, I made a mistake. Don't destroy my life over one moment of poor judgment. James looked at her with complete indifference. You didn't show my mother any mercy when you humiliated her in front of all these people. Why should I show you any now? After Victoria disappeared through the ballroom doors, James turned his attention back to his mother. Mom, I'm taking you home. This place doesn't deserve to have you working here. James, I need this job, Margaret protested. I can't just leave. You don't need any job, he said firmly. I've been trying to convince you to let me take care of you for years. You're done working, Mom. You're coming to live with me in California. The crowd was still watching their every move, but James no longer cared about the audience. He wrapped his arm around his mother's shoulders and began leading her toward the exit. What about the charity auction? Margaret asked, still thinking about her responsibilities even after what had happened. What about it? James replied. Let them figure it out themselves. You've given this place 8 years of dedicated service. They can manage one night without you. As they reached the ballroom doors, James stopped and turned back to address the crowd one final time. You all witnessed what happened here tonight. You saw a good woman be treated like garbage by someone who thinks money makes her better than everyone else. Remember this moment the next time you claim to care about treating people with dignity and respect. The auction resumed after they left, but the mood was somber. Many guests left early, uncomfortable with what they had witnessed and their own failure to intervene. The charity raised significantly less money than expected, as several major donors quietly slipped out without making their planned contributions. Victoria Ashworth's reputation never recovered from that night. James Chen's social media post went viral within hours, generating millions of views and countless comments condemning her behavior. Major society publications picked up the story, and Victoria found herself persona non grata at every important social event in the city. Her family's business began losing contracts as clients distanced themselves from the scandal. Board members quietly suggested she take a leave of absence from her executive position. The woman who had thought herself untouchable discovered that in the age of social media, actions truly did have consequences. Margaret Chen moved to California the following month, where she discovered a life she had never imagined possible. James bought her a beautiful house near his own, complete with a garden where she could grow the flowers she had always loved. She volunteered at local charities and finally had time to pursue the hobbies she had never been able to afford. The hotel manager who had failed to protect Margaret was quietly reassigned to a smaller property outside the city. The Grandview Hotel implemented new policies for protecting their staff from abusive guests, though it was too late to repair their relationship with Titan Technologies. Margaret never returned to work as a server. She had learned that sometimes the people who seem powerless actually have more strength than anyone realizes. And sometimes the most important protection comes not from money or status, but from the love of family, who will always stand up for what's right. James Chen's business empire continued to grow, but he never forgot the lesson his mother had taught him that night at the Grandview Hotel. Success meant nothing if you forgot where you came from and who had sacrificed to help you get there. As for Victoria Ashworth, she eventually left the city entirely, moving across the country where her reputation hadn't preceded her. She took a job at a non-profit organization, working with underprivileged youth. Perhaps she finally learned what Margaret had always known, that true worth isn't measured by the size of your bank account, but by how you treat the people around you. The charity gala continued as an annual event, but it was never quite the same. Every year, someone would tell the story of the night a billionaire's mother was attacked by a socialite who learned too late that you never know who you're really dealing with. Margaret's story became a reminder that kindness and cruelty both have consequences, and that sometimes the universe has a way of ensuring that justice is served, even when it takes the form of a son who refuses to let anyone mistreat the woman who sacrificed everything for his success. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.